Welcome to the Insomnia Coach podcast. My name is Martin Reed. I believe that nobody needs to live with chronic insomnia and that evidence-based cognitive and behavioral techniques can help you enjoy better sleep for the rest of your life. The content of this podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only. It's not medical advice and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease, disorder, or medical condition. It should never replace any advice given to you by your physician or any other licensed healthcare provider. Insomnia Coach LLC offers coaching services only and does not provide therapy, counseling, medical advice, or medical treatment. The statements and opinions expressed by guests are their own and are not necessarily endorsed by Insomnia Coach LLC. All content is provided as is and without warranties, either express or implied. Dave often experienced difficulties falling asleep and staying asleep, and this became more of a problem once he became a father. After an overseas trip, Dave's sleep really took a turn for the worse. Not only did he find it hard to fall asleep, he would also wake around 3 a.m. and find it very difficult, if not impossible, to fall back to sleep. This decline in his sleep led to experimentation with over-the-counter medications, the implementation of unhelpful sleep hygiene techniques, and ongoing sleep-related research. Unfortunately, this only led to more worry and anxiety and more sleep disruption. Fortunately, Dave found out about sleep restriction, a core component of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBT-I. Consistent implementation of sleep restriction transformed Dave's relationship with sleep. He began to look forward to going to bed. He rediscovered the pleasurable sensation of sleepiness at night, and he started to fall asleep faster, spend less time awake during the night, and get more sleep. In this episode, Dave shares his transformation and explains how sleep restriction improved his sleep and why consistency and persistence is so important if you want to enjoy better sleep for the long term. A full transcript of this podcast and an accompanying video can be found at insomniacoach.com/podcast. Okay, so Dave, thank you so much for taking the time to come on to the Insomnia Coach podcast today.
Excellent, it's a pleasure.
So let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us when your sleep problems began, and do you have any recollection or any memory of what initially triggered these sleep issues that you dealt with?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that, and it's not one single event. I've always been sort of an anxious sort of person and had trouble like falling asleep and staying asleep. I think it came to a head when I had children, and children really messed with my sleep. Children were the worst thing for sleep. But when it really became a problem for me was when I had a trip to Canada, and remember taking. I remember every time I'd have a cold or a flu, I'd take the flu drugs that would help me sleep at night, and I'd take those and I'd have a fantastic night's sleep. But then the next night I'd be awake and I couldn't sleep properly. So I saw some drugs over the counter in Canada, and I took those to try and get a good night's sleep, and they gave me a great night's sleep. But after 3 or 4 nights of taking them and then going off them, then I found that my sleep drive just absolutely just diminished, and I needed those drugs to get that feeling of sleepiness again. And that's where it really sort of came to a head once I started taking that sleep medication. That just eroded my sleep drive completely and made it so hard to get to sleep at night.
So you mentioned sleep drives. This makes me think that your issues were primarily with that first hurdle, falling asleep at the start of the night. Was that the main struggle that you were experiencing?
That was the first main struggle that I had, but then it came to sleep maintenance insomnia. I'd wake at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd look at the clock and think, okay, 3 o'clock in the morning. It used to be a positive feeling. I used to think 3 o'clock in the morning, I've got another 3 hours sleep, and I'd roll over, go back to sleep. But now I'd look at the clock, go 3 o'clock, I'm going to be awake until 7 o'clock till I get out of bed. And I was just getting more and more frustrated and not sleeping. And then it'd get to 2 o'clock, and then it'd get to 1 o'clock, and I'd end up having like 2 hours sleep or 3 hours sleep, and that was it for the night.
Yeah. It's really interesting you say that about the clock watching, how before you really spent much time thinking or worrying about sleep, if you check the time during the night and it was 3 a.m., you'd be, oh, great, I've got a few more hours left. But your mindset just changes once you're living with that struggle, right? You check the time, and if it's 3 a.m., instead of thinking, oh, great, I've got a few more hours left, you're like, oh no, I've only got a few more hours left. Your mindset changes, even though nothing else has changed.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I typically suggest to people that are struggling with sleep, just stop checking the clock, because it never leads to a positive outcome when you're struggling with sleep. It only has the potential for a negative reaction, which then ends up making sleep more difficult. I mean, is that something you tried, just not checking the time during the night and not checking the clock?
It's something that I do religiously now. I make sure that if I get up at night, like I might go to the bathroom or something, but I come back and I make sure my wife's got one of those little alarm clocks by the bed, and I make sure that I never ever look at that. And it's working at the moment. It's really, really working.
Yeah, it's such a small thing, but I think it can make just such a big impact. And when I tell people about it, they're kind of like, well, how can such a small thing have an impact? I don't think it's going to make much difference. Or they'll say something like, well, the idea of not checking the clock makes me feel kind of anxious, So I just say, well, just give yourself an experiment, just try for a week or maybe 2 weeks, and just not check the clock once you go to bed until your alarm goes off, and just see what kind of effect it has. And overwhelmingly, people find it so helpful.
Yeah, it is.
So you told me that, you felt that perhaps you were someone that often struggled with sleep in the past, but then it kind of came to a head when you went overseas, when you went to Canada. I thought that was interesting because it kind of follows this very common or familiar mold when it comes to the development of insomnia. And by that, I mean that for many people with insomnia, they are kind of like more predisposed to these sleep issues. So if you imagine that there's like this bar, and once you go above that bar, that's when you're struggling with sleep. And some people are just a bit more predisposed. So they start off a little bit higher to that bar. So this could be due to anything. You could have a stressful job, more reactive to stress. You might be a strong morning person or a strong night owl. But just kind of from the start, you're a little bit closer to that bar. But then you have like this model that I'm describing is called the 3P model in insomnia. Then what happens is we have like this precipitating event, which is like the second P in the model. And for you, it sounds like, that was that trip to Canada. And that's what kind of pushed you over the bar and led to this sleep disruption, like this very noticeable sleep disruption. And often that leads us on to this third and final P in this 3P model for insomnia, which is the perpetuating factors. So instead of sleep just recovering by itself, it's perpetuated by our response to this sleep disruption, which is often quite understandable and normal and to be expected. When we travel, that's often a time when some of us will struggle with sleep, because it's just a big change, big environmental change. This kind of, our senses are bombarded with all these new experiences. But these perpetuating factors make it difficult for our sleep to recover. And they can be things like, seeking out that over-the-counter medication, maybe going to bed earlier, staying in bed later, maybe trying to conserve energy during the day, canceling plans with friends, all these things that we do in response to that initial sleep disruption in a bid to improve our sleep. actually kind of backfires and perpetuates the problem. And I just think it's important to talk about that, just because you seem to fit that mold almost perfectly. Do you recognize that, just as I was
Yeah.
talking through it?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Yeah. And you know, all these perpetuating factors, they lead to this disruption, you know, like the sleep drive disruption that you noticed yourself. You know, as soon as you stop taking those over the counter medications, you notice like that disruption to your sleep drive, where there wasn't that sleepiness present anymore. Other people notice, you know, there's like this body clock disruption, where when we get up at all different times of the day, you know, our body doesn't really know if it should be awake or asleep, and that makes the problem more difficult. And then we just trigger a lot of arousal, you know, like anxiety and worry and like catastrophizing, real concern. And of course, that makes sleep more difficult and further perpetuates the problem. And this is like the real challenge that we have with insomnia, is getting the sleep drive back on track, getting the body clock back on track, and dealing with that arousal and that anxiety.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can see that that was the start of my problems. Then I started doing the internet searches and
Mm,
talking to people. I was doing a lot of exercise at that time. So, and a lot of people were telling me that you need to get the 8 hour sleep, and I wasn't getting the 8 hour sleep, and that was getting me more frustrated. And my wife was getting worse sleep because I'd wake up, look at the clock, and I'd toss and turn and complain, and it'd wake her up. And yeah, it was just landsliding. Everything was just making things worse. And so I can see that now, but at the time I couldn't step away from it and then look back at it.
mm. Yeah. And, you know, it's completely natural as well to have that response, you know, because you're experiencing this concern, this distress with your sleep. So you want to pay attention to it and help improve your sleep. So by absolutely no fault of your own, like you did everything that comes naturally to you. You know, you were problem solving, you were trying to implement behaviors and techniques to improve your sleep. But unfortunately, all those like sleep efforts that we call them, they actually make sleep more difficult. And it, that's the strange thing about sleep. And I say this a lot, is so much of our, you know, success in life is down to effort. You know, the more effort generally we put into something, the better the outcome. But sleep is completely the opposite. You know, the more effort we put into sleep, the more difficult sleep becomes. And this is a real problem, because when we've gone through life knowing that effort equals success, when we experience sleep disruption, we put effort in and it doesn't lead to success. And that leads to more worry, because now we're completely lost at sea, you know, and we feel like there's something uniquely wrong with us. Like maybe we've lost the ability to sleep, but we're never going to get better, you know?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned that, you know, you tried these over-the-counter medications. Was there anything else that you tried before you found cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, these CBT-I techniques, which we'll talk about in a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. I tried pretty much everything. I did the sleep hygiene. I think anybody who's got insomnia has tried the sleep hygiene. And the sleep hygiene, like, you try to tweak little things here and there, but I don't think it made that much difference at all. But I did meditation and mindfulness, and that seemed to help a lot. Um, it didn't help to get to sleep, but when I woke in the middle of the night, I'd lay in bed and do the I think it's the 4, 5, 7, 8 breathing technique, and that used to calm me down. And I could lay there, and I'd wake up I'd get out of bed. I wouldn't wake up in the morning, but I'd get out of bed at 6 o'clock, and I'd feel rested, like I was still getting through the day, and I was still feeling great. But if my wife asked me that question, like that everybody asks every morning, is like, "Oh, how'd you sleep?" She ended up not asking that question because of the bad responses she got from
Mm,
me. I'd say yes, it was horrible. I had about 2 hours sleep, and I don't know how I'm going to get through the day. But an hour into the day, and I was fine. I was
mm,
fine. But once that sun went down about 6 o'clock, I could feel I was getting tired, but by the time I came to bed, I was so stressed that the sleep drive had gone, and like my mind was ticking over, and I couldn't get to sleep at that time. So yeah.
Yeah, that I think that's something that a lot of people listening to this are going to relate to. As the evening starts, you recognize those sleepiness cues, and you probably think in your head, oh, if I went to bed now, I'll be fine. I'll go straight to sleep. But then as your actual bedtime approaches, you start to, or even just when you get into bed, you suddenly feel wide awake again. And that's commonly this symptom of like this conditioned arousal. So basically, because so many times you've gone to bed and struggled, you've been wide awake, you've been worried, anxious, frustrated, and because that's happened over and over and over again, you've kind of learned that that is what happens when you get into bed. So when you're not in bed and you're not going to be going to bed soon, you are pretty relaxed, and so you feel sleepy. But then once that bedtime approaches or you get into bed, your brain is all of a sudden preparing for that awful night to come, because that's what it's expecting, because it's experienced it over and over and over again. So I think a lot of people are going to relate to that.
Yeah, and I had this. I had sleep maintenance insomnia for about 2 years, and you think that's it. This is my life. I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I lie there until it's time to get out of bed. And you think, well, you sort of resign yourself to that's it. But it wasn't until I found those techniques, and it was a game changer. It was amazing.
Yeah. Oh, so let's talk about that. So you mentioned, what almost everyone does, when you have sleep issues, you go online and typically you find out about sleep hygiene, which isn't helpful actually for people with chronic insomnia. And we actually know that, well, people with insomnia don't always know it, but people that work in the field of sleep know it. And certainly the people that are doing like clinical studies and research, they actually give sleep hygiene to the control group, because they recognize it as a non-intervention. It's something that we know doesn't work. So when we're trying to look at how effective different treatments are, we give the control group sleep hygiene because we know it doesn't work. But yet it's the first thing that is often recommended to people with insomnia. And I think that's so unhelpful, because then, of course, it's another thing that you try and it's another thing that doesn't work. And then you just have more worry because you're like, this didn't work for me and everyone is recommending it. There's definitely something uniquely wrong with me here. And it just leads to more worry. So when was it? I think it was 7 months ago. Yeah, about 7 months ago. You found the Insomnia Coach website, you found me, and you found out about cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, these CBT-I techniques that we talk a lot about on the podcast here. Had you heard about CBT-I before you found my website, or was this something that was completely new to you?
No, it was completely new to me. I'd done a lot of searches, and I thought I had exercise-based insomnia and all these other things. I sort of self-diagnosed myself, and I was wrong. But yeah, when I came across your website, I tried you offered the 14-day emailing, and it was so good. It put my mind at ease, and then I did the sleep diary, which was another great tool to highlight. Doing the sleep diary highlighted how bad my sleep was. But the sleep diary did get me clock watching a lot more, and the clock watching sort of negated the sleep diary. I needed to. I think on one of your podcasts, a woman would play music and know that the track was 15 minutes long, so she'd get out of bed. So that I should have done something like that. And instead, I'd look at the clock and then go, oh, another 10 minutes, I can get out of bed. Look at the clock again. Okay, it's another 5 minutes. I'm not going to get any sleep tonight, and that'd get me more frustrated. So that was for me was a negative thing, just looking at the clock so much.
Yeah, I think it's really important with that sleep diary, to recognize that We don't want you to be clock watching when you're filling out a sleep diary or a sleep journal, sleep log, whatever you want to call it. The only time we need you to check the clock when you're filling out a sleep diary is, when you go to bed. Just write down the time you go to bed, and then when you get out of bed in the morning, start the day. Everything else should just be estimates. But
Yes.
I totally get that it can really increase that temptation to check the clock because you just want to be so accurate when filling out the sleep
Yes.
diary, but really we're just looking for your estimates, your subjective experience, like how long you think you spent awake during the night, for example, like how long you
Yes.
think it took you to fall asleep, because really that's all that matters, because sleep is just so subjective,
Yeah.
because someone could get 7 hours of sleep and feel great. Someone could get 6 hours of sleep and feel great. Someone could get 9 hours of sleep and feel terrible. So the numbers really don't matter. It's just how you feel. And
Exactly.
so even if you think that you're really bad at estimating time, you might be. But the way we estimate time tends not to change over time. So it's still really helpful in terms of tracking, trends and progress,
Yeah.
and just kind of, it's almost like a form of accountability in a way as well. If you're targeting this consistent out of bed time in the morning, just taking those few minutes in the morning to just write down, yes, I did get out of bed at 6 in the morning. And I think you touched upon that. It kind of highlighted these potential areas of improvement for yourself,
Yeah.
like when you first got going with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So go ahead.
I should get back and do that. Try the sleep diary again, but do it properly this time, and not look at not clock watch, and just go by the feeling of how you feel in the morning. Are you ready to face the day? Do you feel okay? Have you had enough quality? It's not quantity of sleep; it's quality of sleep. If you've had good quality sleep, then yeah, you can you can face the day. But that 8 hour myth was totally throwing me off when I was first doing it. I thought, oh, I have to get 8 hours of sleep, and I was not getting, without drugs, I could not get near that 8 hours of sleep, and even with medication, you get the 8 hours, but you still felt groggy and drowsy the next day. I could get 6 or 7 hours like sleep without the medication, and you'd feel so much better. Like
Mhm.
you got better quality sleep, and that sleep drive had kicked in, and you're okay for the day. And I remember talking to people at my work, and they'd ask me how, because they knew that I had insomnia. They'd ask me how do I sleep, and I'd say, oh, I have got about 2 hours, but that's all I need. I've evolved into the next generation of people. I don't need sleep anymore.
Yeah, that whole 8 hours thing, this pressure that we can put ourselves under to get a certain amount of sleep is a real problem. The number of people that actually need 8 hours, I think, is pretty minuscule. Very few people regularly get 8 hours of sleep. I think when we look at actually the averages, it's far closer to 6 hours than 8 hours, for this
Yeah.
average nightly sleep duration for people. But I think what can kind of perpetuate it is, when you ask friends or family how much sleep they got, they just think of when they went to bed, when they got out of bed, and they just think, all right, that's 100% of that was sleep. So that's probably closer to 8 hours, because they're not thinking about, the time they
Yeah.
spend in bed reading, or the time that they're spending in bed just talking to their partner, or just lying awake waiting to fall asleep. They're not counting the time they wake up during the night to use the bathroom. They're not counting the time that they wake maybe shortly before their alarm. So there's all these like little pockets of time that they're not thinking of, quite rightly, because they're not
Yeah.
thinking about sleep very much. So
Yeah.
they just kind of default to, about 8 hours. And I think that kind of perpetuates this pressure, this belief that we all need that amount of sleep. And it's really not true. And it just leads to this effort to get more sleep, which can really backfire and make sleep more difficult.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So, okay, so you found out about these CBTI techniques. Can you tell us a bit more about, the specific techniques that you found that were helpful for you?
The sleep restriction, which I hate the term sleep restriction, as I've said. It's bedtime bed restriction, but that worked so well. I actually look forward to the times that I could. My wife, I fell into the trap of going to bed the same time as my wife went to bed. So at 10 o'clock I'd go to bed with her, and I wasn't tired, and I'd just lie there. She would, her head would hit the pillow, she'd fall asleep, which would frustrate me no end. You'd listen to her sleep, and I'd lay there going, okay, I'm going to lie here for another hour before I get to sleep. But the sleep restriction, like, she'd go to bed, and then I'd go, okay, great, I'm up for another hour now. I can watch watch TV, a show that she wouldn't watch. I could watch sport, I could watch her movies. So I really look forward to like having that time, and it was my own time, but then you could you've actually got the feeling of being sleepy again, which I wasn't getting. So I was getting that feeling of being sleepy, but only after lying in bed for 2 hours and getting frustrated. So I was getting that feeling of being sleepy while watching TV, and you'd actually go to bed and feel like, oh, I want to get into bed. You feel like you'd associate that feeling of getting into bed was positive, whereas it was negative before. So and I actually really liked having that time to myself.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Some people, they get quite concerned with the idea of allotting less time for sleep because they think that spending less time in bed means there's not that opportunity to get more sleep. But the thing is if you just look back on your own experience, you know from your own experience that spending more time in bed isn't leading to more sleep. But what it is doing is leading to more time awake, and that's not pleasant. Like, going to bed before you've got that strong sense of sleepiness, it isn't a pleasant experience. And so you can kind of turn that around. We're not looking to, let's say your average nightly sleep duration is 5 hours. We're not saying only spend 4 hours in bed. We're not cutting sleep away from you. We're just taking the wakefulness away, so
and I use your analogy of, like, you don't sit at the dinner table waiting to get hungry, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's strange that we feel, I don't know, I can understand it, the idea that let's spend more time in bed, we give ourselves that opportunity for sleep. But when we have that idea, that strategy in our minds, we can kind of gloss over the fact that it's never really worked for us in the past. But yeah, it's this behavior that we keep on doing in the hope that something will miraculously change. But what does help is just looking at your average nightly sleep duration, maybe just seeing that as your current sleep capability. So let's say your average nightly sleep duration right now is about 5 hours. So from there, maybe just say 5.5 hours for sleep. So you're not taking any sleep away. You're still giving yourself like that half an hour opportunity for a bit more sleep. But what you're really doing is just reducing all that time spent awake, and you're building that sleep drive during the day. So by staying up, typically you'll be staying up a little bit later. And so you get that feeling of sleepiness back. And so many people are like, it's great. I look forward to the evening now, after a few weeks of trying this, and they start to get that feeling of sleepiness back. It's just this big revelation. I'd kind of I'd forgotten what it was like to feel sleepy, and they actually look forward to staying up later, exactly as you described. So it was really good to hear you describe it just like that.
Yes, 100%. It was a simple thing, but it was such a mind-changing thing to take those feelings of negativity and turn them around. And it was just such a positive thing to have that time to myself, like when I was staying up, but also getting, like, I was positive to go to bed, and I felt like I felt so tired. Like when you got the sleep restriction and your window is like pushed back, you're struggling to stay awake and watch TV. But when you go to bed, you feel like, I can relax, and you feel so happy, and you feel the sheets on your body, and you feel the weight of your body on the bed, and you just, yeah, you go out within. I was going out within 5 minutes easily.
Yeah, I think it's just like you just described, it's just such a big mindset change, where you start to
Yeah,
look forward to that moment of getting into bed instead of starting to dread it.
yeah,
Um, and just, I think too, another benefit of this is because you're spending less time awake in bed because you're more sleepy and you're not allotting quite so much time for sleep, you spend less time awake in bed, so you're kind of chipping away at that conditioned arousal, that we talked about a little bit earlier. So you're kind of retraining yourself to see the bed as a place for sleep instead of wakefulness. And so
yes,
that's like another one of these long-term benefits is the bed once again starts to become this strong trigger for sleep, and that's why it's just
yeah.
so helpful for the long term.
Yeah, and I talk to a lot of people who don't have insomnia about, what do you do? And, as you say, they say, oh, yeah, nothing. I just go to bed, and I tell them about my negative association with sleep and bed, and they go, well, I love the bed. I love going to sleep, and it was only after when you get that sleep drive and you feel so tired that when you do start to appreciate the bed and love the bed again and love to get to bed instead of dreading, like you'd feels tired, feel sleepy, but then on that walk to bed, that feeling of dread would hit you again, and
Mm.
you'd lie down in bed and you go, I'm awake now, but that was the time that I'd go, okay, I need to get out of bed again and go and do something positive and get that positive mind frame again, and then try again, and yeah, it would work.
Yeah. How did you find it? Because we're talking about this, the front end right now, just typically involves staying up later. How did you do on the other side, which is this having this consistent out of bedtime in the morning? Because that's often something that people will struggle with, just the idea that they have to get out of bed by a certain time, even if they're having a great night of sleep or even if they're having a terrible night of sleep. Was this something that you struggled with, or did you find it quite easy to do that?
Well, I have to get up to go to work and get I've got young kids, so I've got to get them ready for school, and
Mhm.
so having a bed a wake time was not a problem. I'm quite happy with that. The thing that I did struggle with was the getting out of bed at, like, when it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and when I wasn't tired, and getting up and doing something, because that to me, I tried that a few times. I didn't stick with that. But a couple of times I'd get up and start doing things, and it was a real struggle for me to get back to sleep after that.
Mhm.
And I would find that, well, the next day my sleep drive would be crazy high, and I'd sleep the next night. So it did work in that way. But getting out of bed in the morning was not a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah, that technique you just touched upon, getting out of bed when you're struggling. I think for many of us, we can be a little bit almost over eager to jump out of bed, when we're awake during the night. And sometimes that can make it hard to get the right results from that technique, just because. So it's known as stimulus control. And the idea is it's just another one of these strategies for retraining ourselves to see the bed as a place for sleep instead of wakefulness. So, generally speaking, what we do is use the bed only for sleep. So, if we're awake, we get out of bed. But it can be quite tempting, as soon as we wake, to then suddenly jump out of bed. What I tend to suggest to people is that it's okay to wake during the night because everyone does it. Waking during the night is completely normal and it's a normal part of sleep. So if you wake during the night and if you still feel calm and relaxed, then you might as well stay in bed, because the conditions are right for sleep because you're calm and relaxed. But it's that moment, if you suddenly start to feel really worried, really anxious, really frustrated, you're tossing and turning, whipping the sheets around,
Yeah.
groaning out loud, and like
Yes.
that's kind of your prompt to just get out of bed and just do anything that you find relaxing and enjoyable. It's almost like a distraction from the mind to stop it from just focusing on that frustration. And it's like this
Yeah.
mental reset switch, even if it's you're only out of bed for like 5 minutes, and over the long term, that can just be helpful at just removing that conditioned anxiety, like as soon as you wake up and spending all that time frustrated, you don't allow yourself to reinforce it, because instead what you're doing is just, getting out of bed when you feel anxious and worried and frustrated for a few minutes or
Yeah.
20 minutes. Some people will watch like a TV show, like an episode of Friends or something, and then return to bed.
Yeah.
But, that is one of these strategies that isn't really intended to help improve your sleep that night. That's more of like one of these long-term strategies, just over time, to help you relearn to see the bed as a place for sleep. But I think it is easy for people, just in their enthusiasm to get results quick. As soon as they wake, they'll just kind of jump out of bed.
Yeah.
Which isn't always that helpful. Sometimes if just recognizing it's okay to wake up during the night, and it's certainly okay to stay in bed if you're calm and relaxed, because that means the conditions are still right for you to fall back to sleep.
Yeah, well, I found that I had the sleep maintenance insomnia mainly, which was waking at in the early hours of the morning. But it was the sleep restrictions to having my bedtime later, which cleared that up as well, because the sleep drive was so large when I went to bed that I would wake at 3, but I'd get back to sleep pretty much straight away because I was still so tired. Whereas before I'd go to bed at 10 o'clock and I'd wake at 3, and that was it. I'd feel wide awake. My brain would start ticking, and I'd get anxious, and that was it. I'd just be lying in bed, or get out of bed and do something, but I would very rarely get back to sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm really glad that you said that, because I get a lot of people that tell me, well, this technique, this of allotting less time for sleep, how's that? I can understand how it's going to help me fall asleep and improve my sleep there, because I'm going to be sleepier, but I don't understand how it's going to help me, with those nighttime awakenings, with waking before my alarm. Like, how is that going to help me? I don't understand. And so It's interesting that you found, that you just described that you found it really helpful. Why do you think that was? Do you think it was because when you woke during the night, you just still had a higher level of sleepiness, or do you think there was something else to explain why you found it so helpful?
No, I think that I did. I woke during the night, but I was still sleepy. Like when I had the sleep restriction. But yeah, when I didn't have the sleep restriction, I'd gone to bed early, and then I woken up and my body's just sort of turned on, and my mind turned on, and I got started feeling anxious, and I looked at the clock. I clock watched, and it just escalated things, so that I wasn't getting back to sleep. But when I shifted that time, I was just so tired, so exhausted, that I just went pretty much straight back to sleep. I still have times where I will be awake, but the norm now is that I get back to sleep.
Yeah. Sometimes I get people say to me, just this idea of having less time available for sleep gives me anxiety and makes me feel worried. Or someone will say, oh, I tried this for a few days. I tried it for a week or 2 weeks, but I just found that I was paying more attention to sleep. I felt more anxious because I knew I had less time available to sleep. Is that something that you dealt with, or did you just kind of go all in without much thought or concern about that?
Yeah, I think with the sleep diary, it made me think too much about it. I was thinking too much about the sleep, and I was thinking all day about it, and it was just consuming my thoughts. It was only when you start to not. For me, it made a huge difference. Not clock watching. It made me switch off my mind a lot more, and I could think about other things instead of. I look at that clock, and it just, all the negative thoughts flood back, and you can't get them out of your head, and you're thinking, okay, this is not productive. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's like things are so much bigger than, in the light of day. They're so insignificant, but it could just be some little thing that my brain would start ticking, and I just couldn't get it out of my head, and I couldn't switch off and get back to sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that is really common too. All these thoughts that we have during the night, they do seem like so much bigger when we have them during the night. You know, if we have like a thought at 3 in the morning, our reaction to it is often very different to what our reaction would be at, say, 3 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is just due to, you know, we're just not at our best at 3 in the morning, which sounds obvious to say, but, you know, when we have these thoughts at 3 in the morning, they can seem, first of all, they can seem 100% true. You know, we could have a thought that says something like, it's going to be impossible to get through the day tomorrow because I'm awake at 3 in the morning. You know,
Yeah.
but if you have that thought 3 in the afternoon or just reflect back on it, well, look, you are getting through the day. Maybe the day's a bit more difficult, but maybe you're having a good day. Maybe there's a few good moments. You know, you can kind of chip away at those thoughts in the cold light of day. But when you have them at night, they can just seem deadly accurate and deadly serious. And this really makes it harder for you to just calm your mind down during the night.
Yeah. Definitely.
So right now we're kind of painting this picture that sleep restriction is kind of this magic pill. You know, you go to bed later one night and suddenly your insomnia is cured. But I think it's important to be realistic so people have the right expectations here, because it often takes a while for these CBT-I techniques, of which sleep
Yep.
restriction is one, to work. So can you tell us, like, how long it took for you, you know, implementing sleep restriction before you kind of noticed those results, and how long it took you to get that confidence back and think and worry
Yep.
less about sleep?
Yeah, well, I did the sleep diary. I think you recommended do it for a month, so I did it for a month, and I could see that my sleep was bad. I could see some nights were better than others, and I thought I'll do this again, and I printed out the sleep diary again, and I did it for another month, and things started to get better. But it wasn't until I didn't clock watch. I was watching the clock too much, but after that, so it was probably about 2 months in. But I was doing the sleep restriction, and I was enjoying it more. I was enjoying like that time where I'd stay up and I'd go to bed sleepy, and I'd sleep a lot better, and I realized that I was getting a lot more sleep when I wasn't thinking about it as much. I was thinking
Mhm.
when I had the sleep diary, it would make me think, and I look, okay, now this is 15 minutes. I've got to put 15 minutes in the sleep diary. It's taken me a half an hour to get to sleep. And I was thinking about it too much. Whereas
Yeah.
when I just basically stayed up later and got that sleep drive like kicking in and went to bed. I wasn't thinking about it as much as it's when I was thinking about it. It was making me anxious, and it was when I took that anxiousness out of it and just went, okay, let's just try this without actually documenting everything, and it really kicked in, and then it started working. So it was probably about two 2 months of doing the sleep diary, and then within 2 weeks after that of just restricting my bedtime, where I found it made a massive difference. That was a game changer for me. That really helped me sleep, and I can feel that feeling of sleepiness now. So I
Mhm.
can I can recognize that, whereas I couldn't recognize that before.
Yeah, you know, I said this to you before when I was preparing for this episode. I remembered that email that I got from you about 4 weeks after, you know, we first connected together, and you said that after that 4 weeks, you know, you were finding that you're just falling asleep so much faster, you know, and that your wife actually said that you were starting to fall asleep faster than her, and that's something that never used to happen.
It's
And
unheard
then
of.
yeah, and then a little bit later after that, you know, I remember that email when you just said to me, I got these like 6 hours of solid uninterrupted sleep, you know. So I think it's just important to emphasize, you know, that it does take time, and like this can, you really got to be consistent with it. You know, it's so easy for, because we're so desperate to make these improvements really quickly, we can almost in a way put pressure on ourselves to get these results, you know. So we're really like self-monitoring, which actually makes
Yeah,
progress more difficult.
yeah,
But it is so important to recognize that it does take time, you know, just like it took time for the insomnia to become entrenched. It kind of takes time to pick it apart. So I think that's really important that you yourself recognize, it was about a 2 month long process. It wasn't
Yeah.
something that happened in a week or two. It was like closer to 8 weeks than 8 days.
Yeah, well, it's a bad habit that I've made over. I've had this bad habit for over 2 years. So to take 2 months to break is expected.
Yep, absolutely. So what's your sleep looking like now? Like what does a typical night look like for you?
Well, it's funny that you say before that I was feeling great after having 6 hours. I had 6 hours uninterrupted sleep. Now I'm thinking that's one of my worst sleeps is 6 hours. I was probably sleep between 6 and 7 hours and
Hmm.
typically a night. So and yeah, that is I feel great after having 7 hours is amazing, but it's not quantity of sleep; it's quality of sleep. I can feel better when I've had a really good quality sleep, and I it's weird that the way your mind works. If you tell yourself you've had a good night's sleep, you can get on with the day just fine. If you have a bad night's sleep, and my wife stopped asking me the question like, "How'd you sleep?" Because I'd say horrible. She just wait for me to say if I had a good night's sleep or not. But yeah, I feel even if I have 6 hours sleep, which is one of my worst night's sleep now. If I tell myself, "Oh yeah, no, it's okay. I've done this before. I can go to the gym and I can still work out and then have a good day, have a productive day." And I know that if I've had a bad night's sleep that night, that my sleep drive is going to build up so much that I'm going to sleep. So there's no two ways about it. That's going to happen. So it puts my mind at ease.
Yeah, I think that's another one of the benefits of the bedtime restriction, the sleep restriction, is that it does consolidate sleep. Once your body learns that it's only got this very specific window in which it has that opportunity to sleep, you do tend to spend less time awake during the night, and that's consolidated sleep, which is generally better
Yes.
quality sleep, and that has far more of an effect on how you feel during the day than quantity alone. It's like I have clients that I work with, and they would, like, let's say, get 7 hours of broken interrupted sleep where they're in and out of sleep all night, but they estimate that they get like 7 hours of sleep. And then when we implement the sleep restriction, like start allotting less time for sleep, um, they might get less sleep in the short term, like let's say 6 hours of sleep, 5.5 hours of sleep, but they notice how much better they feel during the day, even though they're technically getting less sleep, just because that sleep is so much more consolidated. There's less of that wakefulness. There's less of that in and out of sleep. Some people
Yeah.
say, I just feel like I'm getting so much light sleep. It's not really
Yeah.
restorative. And I think that's one area that it can really help with.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely.
How did you get to the process of like extending out your sleep window as you noticed that your sleep was like improving and you were spending more time asleep? Or did you have like a specific technique or a method to just expanding out that amount of time you allowed yourself to sleep?
No, I sort of winged it.
Mm.
I just kept pushing it back because I was keeping the sleep diary and it was showing that I was having poor sleep. So I kept pushing it back, and yeah, I was getting so tired that I could feel that feeling of being tired. So I kept I'd push it back until 12 o'clock at night, and then I kept bringing it forward. And when I felt that I was tired, I could internally I could recognize that this is a good opportunity for me to go to bed. I could
Mm.
feel tired, so I'd be staying up and expecting to stay up for 2 hours, and I'd watch a movie and I go, I feel exhausted now. I'm going to bed because I know that my body is ready for sleep. It's the best opportunity. I would find sometimes that I would try to push through that, and then I would start getting anxious again, and I wouldn't sleep. So I know that was the time to go to bed, and I'd go to bed and I'd fall asleep pretty much instantaneously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting the way you said that, just because once you start to notice the benefits, i.e., you are noticing that sleepiness occurring in the evening, then you just basically based it on that, So if you felt that you were capable of getting more sleep, then you would just allow yourself to go to bed a little bit earlier and then see what happened, and then if you're still doing well, not spending that much time awake during the night, again, you let yourself go to bed a little bit earlier, because you just become more aware of your own sense of sleepiness, because you really kind of take the clock out of that equation and just go by your own levels of sleepiness. Did you notice that any times that maybe you expanded it out too quickly and that you kind of went back to spending a lot of time awake during the night? Did you have any like setbacks like that along the way?
I would have a set bedtime that I would, I'd try to get up to. But if I felt sleepy before then, I would go to I would go to bed and I would pretty much sleep well. I wasn't getting that wakefulness at night. I wasn't, if I felt that I was really tired, if I pushed it, I'd get overtired and I'd get to bed and I'd feel anxious. But I pretty much felt that once I was tired and went to bed, that the sleep maintenance insomnia that I had would pretty much disappear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, one of the questions I was planning on asking you was whether you're still implementing these CBT-I techniques. But I think you kind of already answered that, because you've just explained that, you just use your sleepiness cues, your own cues for sleepiness now, to know when it's time to go to bed. But I think the real beauty of these CBT-I techniques is because that's kind of where we want you to get to. We want you to get to this stage where, you're not really analyzing sleep that much anymore. You're not really thinking about sleep. You're just kind of going to bed when you feel sleepy. But you've always got them with you to fall back on, so if you go through this period of a week or two where you're really struggling, that you can just kind of pull all these techniques back out of your back pocket and just implement them again to help get your sleep back on track.
And that's what I do. I use those CBT-I techniques, but I don't. I'm not like going, okay, no, I can't go to bed until 11:30. I go, okay, now I can't go to bed until I'm feeling this amount of tired, like this tired, and when I do go to bed, I do sleep.
Yeah. All right, Dave. So I really appreciate how much time you've shared with us today. I got one last question for you, which is this: if someone with chronic insomnia is listening and feels as though they've tried everything, they're beyond help, and they can't do anything to improve their sleep, what would you tell them?
I would definitely say look up your website. Look up Insomnia Coach. The techniques were a game changer for me. The sleep restriction was amazing. The sleep restriction, and don't look at the clock. The clock is the enemy of sleep.
All right, Dave, thanks again for sharing your time with us today. I think a lot of people are going to find this discussion really helpful. I think they're going to identify with so much of what you've said. And the idea behind all of these podcast episodes is that if people can recognize their experience in yours and see that you managed to get better, get your sleep back on track, and get to that point where you don't really think about sleep anymore, then they can too. And I think that that's very reassuring and hopefully motivating for people to implement these CBT-I techniques, or maybe revisit them if they've tried them before in the past. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come on.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Martin.
Thanks for listening to the Insomnia Coach podcast. If you're ready to implement evidence-based cognitive and behavioral techniques to improve your sleep, but think you might need some additional support and guidance, I would love to help. There are 2 ways we can work together. First, you can get my online coaching course. This is the most popular option. My course combines sleep education with individualized coaching and is guaranteed to improve your sleep. You will learn new ways of thinking about sleep and implement better sleep habits over a period of 8 weeks. This gives you time to build sleep confidence and notice results without feeling overwhelmed. You can get the course and start right now at insomniacoach.com/online. I also offer a phone coaching package where we start with a 1-hour call. This can be voice only or video, your choice, and we come up with an initial 2-week plan that will have you implementing cognitive and behavioral techniques that will lead to long-term improvements in your sleep. You get unlimited email-based support and guidance for 2 weeks after the call, along with a half-hour follow-up call at the end of the 2 weeks. You can book the phone coaching package at insomniacoach.com/phone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Insomnia Coach podcast. I'm Martin Reed, and as always, I'd like to leave you with this important reminder. You can sleep.